All right, guys, welcome back. Today we're going to talk about growth curves and populations. So a growth curve is just anything that shows the rate at which a population is growing. So here, like here, we have a high rate of growth. Here we have a low rate of growth. And as we finished up with that last video, this one's kind of topped off and reached its carrying capacity. All right, so two types we'll talk about is S and J shape, or logistic and exponential growth. Okay, so the key here is this is with limiting factors, so something that slows or limits the rate of growth. All right, so we can see here we have a pretty good growth rate, but then right about here we start leveling off, and honestly here we probably reach carrying capacity. We'll go over carrying capacity a little bit, and then what's going to happen with this graph is going to go back down, go back up. And we'll talk a little bit more about these when we get to predator-prey relationships. But the key here is that something is going to stop it from growing. Okay, like max out its growth potential. Doesn't matter what, doesn't matter who, doesn't matter how, but something is going to do it. Now, we reach probably about hour 11 or so. Boop, over to here. Okay, and in this portion, well, let's say maybe even hour 10, I might be able to. Well, gosh, that was bad. Okay, so it's hard to draw straight lines on this thing. So maybe right about there, we have what we call exponential growth, and we'll talk about that in the next slide. So both logistic graphs will have exponential growth, but just not forever. So exponential growth is when we have no limiting factors. So just woo, all but max potential. Everybody lives, woo. Okay, so just okay. Once again, this is not realistic. Most everything in life that I know of, that I can think of off the top of my head, has a S-shaped curve, because there will be some limiting factor of some kind that slows down that rate of growth. But if we were to take a snapshot of certain things, they do have this exponential growth where they're kind of reaching their max biotic potential. However, at some point that will take a downturn, because ultimately there will be a limiting factor down the road. All right, so survivorship curves. These are graphs that represent distinct patterns of how animals survive, meaning do they die early, do they die late, and also it tells us a little bit about how much care they give and things like that. So I'm going to ask you to pause the screen, write the note, and then we'll pick it back up. All right, so you wrote down what you needed to. So let's go on and talk about these in a visual representation in the next slide. All right, so we got three types: type 1, type 2, type 3. Okay, so type 1, these are going to be large mammals. And you as a human would qualify as a fairly large mammal. All right, few babies, lots of care. Okay, whether you want to admit it or not, your parents have given you a lot of care over your lifetime. Okay, so that being said, you and us and humans fall into type 1. Of course, you do have birth, death, and things like that, but there's usually this very little decrease in life expectancy through those first 20, 30, maybe even 40 years. All right, and then the rate starts to pick up as we get closer to, we'll just say 100. Okay, that's some magical numbers here at the bottom. All right, the rate of people dying is going to be increasing over time. That's perfectly normal. It's all part of life. Okay. Now, type 2, on the other hand, all right, they're going to give a little bit of care. Of course, once again, everything, has this rate of dying when they were young, but we just it's more equivalent all the way down. Okay. They will give a little bit of care. So things like small rodents, some reptiles, things like that are going to be where we fall in here. Okay. So they're going to give birth to more babies, but not like litters of children, or like 20s and 30s. Probably talking 5 to 10 at most, in a most normal pattern. Like birds would also fall into this. Like clutch size is very important in birds. So they give more than type 1, but definitely not as many as babies as type 3, and they give some care, and it's not for very long either. Usually under 6 months. Some will give it a little bit longer here and there. It just depends on the species. But ultimately, after about 6 to 7, especially after a year, Mother Nature do your worst kind of thing. Okay, you live, you die. The best one, the individual that is best suited for that environment will continue, make babies, and therefore we have evolution and where kind of where we're going and what we'll talk about next. All right, type 3. We are going to have lots of babies. Okay, could be hundreds, could be thousands. Just depends on the species. But there is no care given. Okay, so this is why we see this very high rate of death at the beginning. But once you make it, you're doing pretty good until whatever your old age is. Okay, so that's kind of your 3 different types. So you got your type 1, large mammals, a few babies, lots of care. Type 2, all right, small rodents, some reptiles, birds, 5 to 10 babies, and they give some care. Not, it doesn't last nearly as long. And then type 3, last but not least, whole bunch of babies, but they give 0 care. All right. And a good example of type 3 animal would be insects. Plants are a great example, yes, because they don't give any care to the young, but insects are a good animal example of type 3. Now, last little part we'll talk about is down here at the bottom. We have K selection and R selection. Okay, so K selection is type 1, lots of care, all right, few babies. R selection is almost no children, lots and lots of children, but once again, no care at all. So K is going to be type 1, and R is type 3. All right, so we're going to talk quickly about, we're going to talk a little bit about competition here. So competition, as we see, is considered negative. Now, why in the world would it be negative? Is because when 2 species have to compete over something, they both have to expend energy to compete for it. It would be easier if I just got to walk up to the water fountain, all right, and get some water, okay? However, I got to compete with somebody else who has their other water bottle. They have their water bottle and they want water, so we're competing. This is not the best example in the world, but you get the idea, okay? So competition, when we talk about the pluses and minuses of symbiosis, this is negative. Nobody's winning here. Okay, yeah, I competed and I won and I got the food if I'm a bear or whatever, but it would have been nice if I didn't have to compete against the other bear. I could have just walked up, ate the food, and walked away. That would have been better. All right, so we have 2 types of competition. We have interspecific and intraspecific. All right, interspecific, all right, is going to be a competition among different species. So here we got a bear and an eagle in competition for the salmon. Okay. So food is a big one. Space can be one, depending on what we're talking about. Like wolves and bears can have similar spaces or territories which they could compete over. And shelter kind of goes into that whole territory thing. Food is going to be the main one that we're really going to, kind of have to deal with. Is how do we get resources if we're both meat eaters, for example? Okay. Now, intraspecific is between the same species. Okay. So this is between the same species. And usually when we're talking about this, we're talking about competition for a mate. Okay. So that competition for a mate can be competition for a house, aka wherever they live, their territory or whatever you want to call it. But to get a mate, you need to have a place for your mate to be. So they could be competing over territory, could be competing over, a good food source. Right? There's tons of things that could be competed over, but usually they're trying to compete with for a mate of some kind. All right, so last little thing we'll talk about today is predator-prey. All right, predator-prey is a positive-negative. One dies, one lives. Okay. Once again, it still would be nice if, like I said, it just walked up in your mouth, But so you still have to compete. You have to run. You have to get it. So it's still, have to expend energy. But, all right, it's obviously an interaction where one wins because the lynx over here is going to get the hare, and therefore it will, get the plus. And since homeboy's dead, he's definitely going to get the minus. Okay? Now, if we look at a predator-prey graph, this is what they look like. So you look and you see that they are very similar. Like, if I move this back like a couple of inches, you see how they mirror each other very well, okay? And the reason is there's this lag period, okay? So we have this lag period between here and here, all right? We have a lag period, okay? So our prey gets up to a considerable proportion. Now our predators can get up to a considerable portion. And as you see right here, we're starting to reach our carrying capacity for this portion of the graph, all right? Well, now we have a whole bunch of a whole bunch of predators and not so many prey, so that's going to go down. Now that there's less food, predators are going to go down. Now that there are less predators, all right, the prey is going to go up. But all right, now there's a whole bunch of food. All the predators are living. Yay, well, crap. All right, too many predators, they go down. All right, once again, not enough food. Oh, crap, got to go down too. All right, so it's just this constant undulation over and over and over again. And this is a predator-prey graph. They look very similar to each other, but there's this lag period where the predator usually catches up and their populations grow after the prey populations grow. All right, so as always, come in with questions. If you have any, I'll be more than happy to answer. See you tomorrow.